Okay, again, just to review briefly, we spoke before in the first lesson that there are 5 levels of consciousness called 5 levels of soul in the classical literature, and each level of consciousness or each level of soul has a name. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida. Those are the 5 levels. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida. Those are the levels of consciousness. What they are conscious of is the world to which they correspond. Each level corresponds to a world. World meaning a plane of reality. There's different planes of reality. And I think I explained this many times before, but just briefly for those who are not familiar with the different planes of reality, the different worlds. The word world in Hebrew comes from the word he'elem, concealment. In the creation of the worlds and the creation of the various planes of reality, initially the higher planes of reality means that there's more revelation of godliness. The further they get down, the more physicalized they become, the more material they become, the more concealed godliness becomes, and that creates a lower world. Within each world, there's many gradations, and there's gradations between the worlds, but in general, it corresponds to the 5 levels of soul, 5 levels of consciousness with 5 worlds. The lowest of the worlds is corresponding to Nefesh, is the world of Asiya. The second world up is called Yetzirah, the world of formation, which corresponds to Ruach, the emotional qualities of the soul. A higher level yet, Neshama. The level of Neshama corresponds to the world of Beriah. Chaya corresponds to the world of Atzilus. And then Yechida corresponds to the world of Adam Kadmon and beyond. There's 2 levels in Yechida itself. So Adam Kadmon and beyond. The first revelation of divinity of godliness is called Adam Kadmon. The primordial shape of, if you could call it shape, the primordial manifestation of godliness in a limited form, even though that form relative to our world is unlimited, but relative to what preceded it is limited. So each of these 5 levels of soul then has an object of consciousness. Each level of consciousness has an object of consciousness. The object of consciousness is the world which corresponds to that level of soul. And therefore, to appreciate that plane of reality or that world or that revelation of godliness, that level of revelation of godliness depends on what level of soul we are talking about. The lowest level of soul, again, is Nefesh. I had expressed in one of the classes, I think maybe the second class, that there's not really that much that goes on in terms of meditation and Nefesh. Now, this is not 100% accurate. Why is it not 100% accurate? Because really, as I think we mentioned, and I showed you a diagram of the Sfirot. If I could just give me a second, I'll find the diagram. Sfirot and soul powers, this is probably it. And if it's not, no, it's not. Okay. All right, one second. Let me just get the... here we are. Probably this one. Got so many diagrams, I never know which one to pull up. Hello? It's not coming up for some reason. Here we go. Okay. Okay. This is good enough. Sorry, I should have done this before, shouldn't I? And soul powers. Okay. No, that's not the one I want. All right, whatever. Okay. Let us just, let me share the screen. All right. So, right, well, I can just do it while we're, oh, it's a PDF, I can't. All right, let me just tell you what's going on. I was looking for the right thing and I didn't find it. I should have called it up before and I didn't, so that's my fault. Let me just explain here the various levels of consciousness as they correspond to I want them to correspond to the Sfirot and the levels of consciousness, but we don't have it here. Right, let's start from the bottom. The world of Asiyah, which is the lowest level of consciousness, called the consciousness of Nefesh. So if you have this diagram in front of you, you could print it out as Nefesh, or you could write the bottom level here as Nefesh. And that corresponds to Malchut, right? The sphere of Malchut. Now, when we said that there's no real meditation associated with the world of Asiyah, it's largely correct. It's not really meditation. It's more action and speech and things like that that are the focus of the consciousness the consciousness of the world of Asiyah. Nevertheless, the Sphira of Malchut in general corresponds to the mouth and the power of speech, also the power of action. Malchut Peh, the Zohar, or the Tikkunei Zohar rather, the introduction to the Tikkunei Zohar, Patach Eliyahu, Elijah opened his discourse. Famous discourse, famous part of the Zohar. We read it on the eve of Sabbath. In many communities, read that discourse. And it begins with the words, Patach Eliyahu, Elijah opened his discourse, he began his discourse. Anyway, he goes on to list the various Sfirot over there, and one of the Sfirot that he talks about is Malchut. And he says Malchut corresponds to the mouth. In other words, Malchut corresponds to not just the mouth in sort of anatomy, but it corresponds to the power of speech, right? And the power of speech is comprised of letters. So really, what we were talking about in the last two classes, we were talking about the Hebrew letters and how they themselves form a certain, have a certain power to be able to connect a person with the light of a Sphira. So we said that each of the Sphirot has a light and a vessel. Right, and the connection between the light and the vessel is a holy name which is associated with that particular vessel. One of the holy names that is associated with that particular vessel. Each of the Sfirot has a holy name associated with it. Those holy names are not names of the lights, but rather names that are associated with the vessels, the inner dimension of the vessel. By using those holy names, we elicit and are able to cause the light to shine forth in that particular vessel, through that particular vessel. Those are the holy names that we discussed in the last class. So there were letters, and we discussed letters and combinations of letters and changing the combinations of the letters, and how that itself is a meditative technique which was used by the famous Kabbalistic sage Abraham Abulafia and those that follow him, and subsequently adopted by Rabbi Yitzhak Luria and his disciple Rabbi Chaim Vital, who used that system. Nevertheless, they use a more advanced system as well, which is the system of names, the names that are associated with the Sfirot, as I mentioned before. This is found in the Zohar and in various other works, and it's also found in the writings of the Arizal, and there's many other works in which all these names are found. I did not mention at the time that there is also a meditation where the vowels, in Hebrew, the vowels of the letters do not come in as part of the letters, not like in English. In Hebrew, the vowels of the letters are either on top of the letters, in the middle of the letters, or at the bottom of the letters. Now, here, for example, is a vowel. You see, these here are consonants. That's a hey, a vav, and a daled. But the vowel sound is pronounced by this little letter over here. 1 second, let me make this a little bit clearer. Here we go. Yeah, this little dot on top of the letter vav. The letter vav is like a straight line with a sort of a head on top of it. And the dot on top of that is a dot on top of the letters. Then there's dots that are in the middle of the letters, for instance, over here and over here. And the majority of the vowels actually come underneath the letters. Like here's a shvan, there's a kametz, there's a segel, and a chirik, and so on. Patach. These vowel sounds are also used in part of meditation, but they're used in the audial parts, the auditory part of the meditation. The letters themselves are more a visual meditation, part of visual meditation. But the vowel sounds give it an auditory quality, give the meditation an auditory quality. So therefore you will have certain letters and certain divine names with pronunciation where you actually pronounce the name or the word, and you hear the sound. You actually say it out loud. It doesn't have to be very loud, but just so that your ears can hear it. Now, this all in itself is, to a certain extent, is an Asiya type meditation, in the sense that the letters and the vowels of the letters, in other words, the visual and the auditory quality of the letters, don't give you anything other than what they are. It says that the letters themselves are like building blocks. The structure and the shape of the letters is significant, but nevertheless, they're building blocks which are themselves, they're domem, they're silent. The letters themselves are silent. It's only when they get the nekudos, the vowels, that they have sound. But even that, even the sound and the vowel, or the sound which the vowels makes and the letters together, all of that is nevertheless still a function of malchut, malchut peh. Yeah, malchut, the mouth, the power of speech, which essentially corresponds to the world of Asiya. So in a sense, in a certain sense, the whole meditation that we're talking about, even though there's holy names involved, etc., and they can be extremely lofty, have a very lofty source, but that particular level of meditation is called an Asiya meditation. It's a meditation on the lowest level because you're using the basic building blocks of things. It would be as if, only as if, it would be as if you're looking at sort of the DNA of things. It can tell you a tremendous amount, but the DNA of a creature is not the creature, right? The DNA of a person is not the person. It has a clue as to what kind of a person he is, right? But it's not his personality. It's not who he or she is. A person isn't their DNA. A person is a person. Let me just... okay, there we go. So, we can take it a step further, and this is the subject of primarily today's class. Instead of just letters or even letters and vowels, instead of names or even names that are found with vowels, the next step in meditation is verses. Verses which have meaning. The original verse, primarily in the Hebrew, because that's where it has its primal meaning is in the Hebrew and not in the translation thereof. But the verse has an intellectual component as well. It's not just a letter which is doimem, which is in itself silent. It's not even a letter which speaks through the vowels. It's not even a combination of letters which form a word, which brings, as I mentioned before, when you have a word, it brings a higher energy into those letters themselves. It's not just the letters, but a higher energy which comes the meaning of the word. But now we're talking about a meaning of a verse that is found in the Torah. So the next level of meditation, therefore, would be a much higher level of meditation, where one is actually contemplating the meaning of a verse. Now, the meaning of something could be from within the verse itself, but it also comes from within the context of the verse, what the whole context of that verse is. So the contemplation that we're talking about over here, therefore, is a contemplation using a higher faculty, not just the faculty of vision, or even the faculty of auditory faculty or visual faculties. It's now engaging the mind in meaning. Now, just let me take a step back to explain that the letters themselves have a certain aura of holiness to them. These are letters through which the world, through which all of creation was created, and therefore they have a certain level of holiness. Furthermore, not only do they have a level of holiness, but when combined into divine names, they have an overarching level of holiness, a very high level of holiness. Similarly, when words are combined into phrases or into verses, there's an energy for each word and an overarching energy of the entire verse. And then there's the energy of the verse in its context. So the meditation on meaning already takes us to a whole different level. Why? Because it's engaging more of the person. If we would start off with meditation, very often the meditation begins with either auditory or visual, depending on what kind of person you are, but with either an auditory or a visual component. The auditory component could be simply music, or it could be you saying the words, then visualizing the words, then feeling the power of the words. In other words, the energy of the words, and then as the words are expand into a verse, understanding that, grasping that verse in its entirety and within its context, obviously, to bring a far greater energy. One of the verses that a lot of people meditate on is the Shema prayer. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Right? Okay. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That itself is a meditation, and there are many people that use that as their primary meditation. We'll discuss this further in later lessons, how this is viewed in various other approaches to meditation. It's not only the meaning of the verse, but a much deeper meaning that comes out of the meaning of the words. It's beyond the meaning of the words, the meaning of the concepts. So, the next level of meditation, therefore, is the level of meaning, and we can go beyond that to the essential meaning of things. Yes, this is one of the reasons that we cannot say God's name. That is correct. Yes. Okay. Any other questions so far? No, there don't seem to be any other questions right now. Okay, so there are many verses which are brought in Kabbalistic literature which form, each verse of which may appeal is the wrong word, may arouse a different emotion and a different sensibility, a different idea. In our meditation, in our meditative process, we go from speech and action to primarily emotion. So the emotions of kindness, awe, or fear, love and kindness, awe or fear, compassion, and so on. Those six emotional qualities are now aroused by various verses which have meaning in them, which have meaning to them. As everybody knows, there are six sides of space, or six directions, up and down in the four directions, north, south, west, east, up and down, right? Those are the six directions. Each one of them in certain meditations has a verse associated with it. There is actually I believe there's a book, if I'm not mistaken, by Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, where he actually discusses these six sides of space and the six verses that correspond to them. And then there's the person in the middle of that space. So there's really seven verses, six verses and six sides, six directions, and then there's the person in the middle, each one corresponding to a different verse. So the more advanced type of meditation then will meditate not only on the divine names in the attempt to elicit the energy, the light which that name is associated with, but also on the verses and the meaning of verses. And we see, for instance, with Samuel, Shmuel, the prophet Samuel, when he was a young boy and he first received prophecy, so he was told by his teacher, when he heard, his first experience was auditory. And he was told to say, Daber ki shomea avdecha, speak, for your servant is listening, your servant hears. In other words, he received his first prophecy as an auditory prophecy. There are many other prophecies which are visual. And for example, in the prophecies of Ezekiel and the Nevuah, the prophetic experiences of Ezekiel were primarily in visions, in visual experiences rather than auditory experiences. And we're going to talk about that more next time when we talk about, or either next time or the time after, when we talk about the concept of the Merkava meditation, the meditation on the Merkava. Just to introduce it very briefly, the concept of the Merkava, which is usually translated as a chariot. Now, chariot simply means, in the sense, a vehicle. It's a vehicle for certain experiences. It's a way to experience certain things. So the Merkava meditation, and those that were involved in Merkava meditation were called Yoredei HaMerkava, those who would go down to the chariot. They go down onto the chariot, or they go down onto the Merkava. The word Merkava itself means combinations of words, combinations of letters. Merkava laharkiv is to put together combinations. So a large section of Merkava meditation has to do with the putting together of letters and the putting together of words and the meanings of verses that appear in the biblical texts. Meditation on the letters, the vowels, the auditory, and then ultimately the transcendent meaning of the verse. And that we will get to next time. We're going to stop for here. We're going to stop for now today. As I said, a short class, but we will get to the next one, God willing, next week. Okay. So are there any questions?